Hi, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm really pleased to be speaking with John-Michael Lander. John-Michael Lander has been creating a voice through his writing, speaking, consulting, and he helps individuals and organizations identify the signs of grooming, manipulating, and the stigmatizing of sexual abuse and how to help survivors of all types of abuse face the past and find their true self. We're going to be talking about sexual abuse today. John-Michael battled with finding his true self and authentic voice. As an elite athlete, he endured sexual abuse from coaches, benefactors, and medical team, which resulted in years of PTSD, depression, anxiety, and suicide attempts. His research, the Grooming Trifecta, provides how grooming affects everyone, no matter their sexual orientation, gender, or religious beliefs. So this talk is for anyone, regardless of their gender, sexual orientation, background, beliefs. It doesn't matter if you were an athlete or not. I really want those who have gone through this to really get some hope and some validation from this talk. John-Michael has represented the USA in international springboard and platform diving. His entertainment experiences include performing on television, on General Hospital, All My Children, and national commercials, as well as the lead in independent films, All the Rage and Pilgrim, and originating many roles on New York stages. He taught high school English for 7 years on the nationally recognized Stivers High School of Arts in Dayton, Ohio. John-Michael has also written 2 novels. One is called Surface Tension, where he broke the silence about being a sexually abused athlete. And his new novel, Cracked Surface, coming out this year, continues to share the effects sexual abuse has had on a person's life. So thanks so much again, John-Michael, for joining me. I'm really glad to have you here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay, let's just start off with give our listeners a sort of a summary. Like there's a lot of things I want to cover today. We only have so much time. Why don't you just sort of give us the summary of your story as a survivor of sexual abuse and how that affected you?
Great, I definitely will. My abuse started when I was about 15 years old, and I was diving. I started to start my diving career. And I had gotten national attention when I took 8th at the Junior Olympics. And what had happened is that a lawyer had seen the article in the newspaper and approached my mother. And he started to groom my mother. So my mother was the first person in this whole story that was groomed first.
So, sorry, the
Sure.
Lawyer groomed your
lawyer.
mother?
Yes. Basically told her that.
I didn't see that one coming.
I'm sorry. Basically, my family lives on a farm. We were from a farm family, and we were struggling a little bit financially, and he knew that. And so he presented that he had a group of professionals that would be able to help with the finances and help my diving career. And he kind of led her to believe that for me to continue to rise up in the ranks of U.S. diving, that this was the only means that could happen, because she couldn't do it herself. Okay. And so she agreed to it and basically handed me over to the professional. And so what the professional did is that he started passing me off to other professionals. And in result, my family were getting like medical exams free, eye exams, medication. My young sister, who had a sledding accident and needed plastic surgery, it was all taken care of. No money from my parents. But what happened is that I had to go have dinner with these men and whatever happened afterwards. And so then they would pass me on and on and on. So that was where it all started. And then at the same time, my coach started to get interested in me and started seeing the potential and started to prepare me for international competitions. And what I didn't know is later on, when we go back to the story, we find out that the lawyer had approached the coach and offered him excess more money to pay attention to. And so then that's, go ahead.
So just to clarify, and I'm in Canada, and sports work a little different, maybe here than in the United States, but where's the money in amateur diving? Or are these people looking down the road to the Olympics with its sponsorships and endorsements? And like, where's the money trail here in all this?
Well, that's very interesting, because there isn't much. And what had
Right.
happened is that these professionals were out of a larger city, that their hub, and they created this, it's kind of like a little, I don't want to call it a mafia, but a group of men who were able to take care and look and search for athletes and students that were going to the Ohio State University. And what they were doing is that they were providing funds so that they could go to school.
Okay.
I was the first high school student that was brought into this circle.
Okay.
And that's how, because of the lawyer. And I guess what had happened, and I don't know this for a fact, but there were certain things that they had to do. It was like a secret society, you know, like the Crossbones and stuff like that from Harvard and all this. So they would protect themselves and each other. So you had a lawyer that would protect everybody if there was any issues.
Right.
And what they also did was have this group of young men come through, and they would have these parties, and they would pass off the young men throughout these parties. And that's how they would travel from party to party to party. And the young men who were selected had their school paid, or had their, like in my case, my diving was taken care of, and all the expenses of that. And so that's how that happened. And that's a whole nother issue. I still have an issue with the word trafficking because I didn't see that as that. But as I've gone, as I've broken my silence in the last 2 years, I've been told that that's what that is. It's a form of trafficking. Because
well, yeah, as you're describing that, it's almost like a ring of
yes,
recruiters, traffickers, using the vehicle of sports, because, and it sort of makes sense, like you want young, fit, attractive men, sure, diving, athletics, you know, that's where you're going to find them. But it's just, and I don't know why this shocks me, because really it shouldn't, but the fact that it's so deliberate and organized and hidden, I guess, like there's no way the general public would have any idea that there's groups of people
exactly. Exactly, because if the general public found out that somehow that would be taken care of and erased or covered up somehow. So basically, if you think about the U.S. gymnastics and how that whole hierarchy blew up, it was sort of similar to that. You got the person at the top, and then you have all these other people protecting what was going on at the bottom.
Right.
And so that's how this kind of ring would work. And unfortunately, I believe it's still happening. It's hard to prove.
Right.
You know, especially with males at this point, because males do not come forward and talk about it like I'm doing, because of our whole, you know, stigmas of our society and what people place on what it is to be a man, and, you know, the masculine anxiety, which we all fear. So that's what keeps this perpetuating. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see this grooming happen with boys, because it's harder to tell. Girls can talk, and people seem to tend to listen to that if a girl speaks, especially now after the Me Too movement, and also with the U.S. gymnastics coming out, and our gold medalists standing up and say this happened to me. So people tend to listen a little closer to that.
Right.
So that's kind of how that works, and that might get into something else you want to talk about later about institutions and stuff like that.
That leads to another question, but I had two more questions. So
sure.
Kind of separately, prior to all this, how much, if at all, did your parents ever have a conversation with you, just in general, about this is what inappropriate and appropriate touch is, this is what it is, this is where people shouldn't touch you? Okay, that's my first question. And then secondly, at what point after getting involved with these people did you realize, oh, there's more to this than I realized?
Well, your first question, my parents never sat us down to give that talk to us.
Okay.
Our childhood, when we first grew up, we lived in an urban situation, and so we were happy. It was just my brother and I. And it wasn't until we moved to the farm that things started to go awry, and little secrets started to come in. And later on, I found out, after my father had passed away, is that he was abused by the Catholic Church priest. And so as he was holding all this in, as things were evolving, I basically was playing out his biggest fear. And so that reverted him back into his trauma past. So he wasn't able to talk to me. So that created a rift between the two of us, which is, I'm really sad to see now, because when I think back of it, I thought he hated me, you know, well, you won't talk to me. You won't even, you know, because it was a hard thing for him to see it happen. So, and on the second, what was the second question again? Was that?
Well, at what point did you?
Oh, yes, right.
Did you realize, oh, there's more to this than I knew about with the section?
It was almost immediately.
It was.
It was immediately after I had my first event with one of the professionals, and I didn't know what to do about it. I was confused. I was completely scared. I couldn't believe it was happening at the time. My body froze. I didn't know how to move. I didn't know how to get, I didn't even know how to speak. And so I just kind of like let it happen, and then it was over. And I was like, well, what just happened? What did that mean? And so I start questioning all that stuff. And at that time, you know, your sexuality comes in. What does this mean? Where do I go from here? And then to be passed on and passed on and passed on. And I started to do things like try to tell my parents, because I know as a child, I wanted them to know what was happening, but they weren't listening. And I remember one time.
You're 15 at this point, right? Okay.
Right, exactly. I remember I told my mother a black sedan came driving up the farmhouse driveway, and I said, I'm not going. And she said, what do you mean you're not going? I said, I just can't do this. I can't go. Don't make me go, please.
Wow.
And she says, you have to go. He drove all the way here for you. And I said, you don't understand. And I finally let it out. I said, he touches me. And she says, what do you mean? And I said, he touches me down there. And she says, where? And I showed her. And I thought, oh my God, this is relief. She's going to hear me. Her face kind of got really twitched up and her lips thinned out. And she looked at me, and then she slapped me across the face and said, it's not nice to make up lies about people. This is a professional of the community, highly respected. And he's here helping us, and he's here to help you. You go have dinner with him and do what he says. If anything ever happened, it was probably your fault.
Oh my God. This is the lawyer she's talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I was like,
that's about the worst possible reaction I could come up with.
Definitely. And of course, then by then I decided, well, if my mom's not going to believe me, no one else will.
No one else will. Yeah.
Exactly. And so when the coach started getting involved and started taking me away to overnight trips and introducing me to alcohol and games and stuff like that, and he started his I don't know how you want to say it, started abusing me as well. I thought he liked me because that's how he presented himself to me, that he knew what was going on, that I could trust him. And it was a slow process. And this is something I want everyone to know. The grooming process is slow. It's not just like an overnight thing, you know? And so he and my mom are very close, and she would get all giddy whenever he would come around because he was well known and everybody respected him. And so, but he would tell me, I understand what you're going through. I went through it. I'm here to help you.
Oh,
and
wow.
So I was like, oh, okay. And then of course, by that time, after the abuse from the professionals, I felt that this was a safe haven. And then he would slowly move into it, and he was charming. And I started to get really confused thinking, could this be a relationship here? Am I really finally found someone who's going to be there for me?
Yeah.
And it just was this convolution and constantly changing and evolving. And the thing I also want to talk sometime maybe later on is how teenage bodies are meant to, when they are touched, there is a reaction. You know, there can be pleasure mixed in with all this confusion, and we don't know what's really real and what's not. And that's something that's really mentally confusing because our brains are not fully developed yet. You know, brains are not fully developed until our mid-20s. And so we are confused.
I want to get to that because it's something I hear a lot from both men and women, that it's very confusing to them that with abuse, sometimes even rape, you know, women, their bodies respond with arousal and some type of pleasure. And so that it's very confusing because they conclude like, well, maybe I wanted that. But I don't want to get, I want to talk about another thing first. So, and just as I hear you talking, I'm thinking about the emotional landscape that this is happening in. Like the context is a feeling of being special, noticed, chosen, wanted.
Yes.
Obligation. You know, you have a sense of obligation. You're handpicked from all these people, and these people are what's the word, playing on capitalizing on their position in the community, professionally, and all of that, right?
Correct.
So you know, when I'm talking to clients and I point out, you know, if you're a child or a teenager being abused by an adult, you know, there's we call that a power differential, a massive power differential. And you took one shot at that and with your mother, and it just fell flat, didn't it? It just fell flat. And that just seemed, it's like you had one bullet in your gun and you fired that and
missed.
It missed. Yeah, okay. So let's move on, kind of talk about this systemic issues. Okay, before I move on, did you want to talk about how that played out, like over, you know, 18, 20, 25 years old? Like, you want to just talk about how that played out a little bit for you? Like, how did that affect you?
Well, I think at the time, as I'm sure you understand this as well, and I think some of your listeners will too, when the abuse is happening, we kind of disassociate ourselves. We find ways to survive. Right. And so we have all these methods. And one of the methods that I learned as I was going through my high school years, because this happened all through high school, as I was getting closer to graduating, I started realizing that if I turned the tables a bit during the abuse, and that I looked like I really wanted to be there, and that I was interested in the perpetrator, and that I found them attractive or whatever, that it didn't happen. It stopped. They were not interested in that. They wanted to have what they came to have. They didn't want a relationship. They didn't want any emotions to be involved because they were going to go home to their wife after this.
Wow.
So it was this kind of, and I don't know how I came around to it, but I would start just like as soon as we get to where we had to go, I would start going, okay, this is what it is, let's go. And then they would back off. And then I found myself, for that evening, I was safe. But that didn't work all the time.
Right.
Because there are the aggressive ones who were not going to take that. They were going to go, oh, I'm going to get what I came for, and here we are. Right. And so that was terrible. And what I think also is very interesting is that although I graduated from high school, I thought I was getting away from it all. And I went to the university on a scholarship, and I thought I can reinvent myself, but I never got help. And that's what I really stressed to everybody. You need to get professional help. So I started to create habits that were tied into this whole world and found myself in similar situations. Okay. And I somehow found myself being stalked by a grad student who constantly would follow me and leave notes on my at the diving pool, on my desk at classes. He found out my schedule, on my dorm, everything. And he lured me to his apartment. And stupid me, I don't want to say stupid me, but I went. And I knew as soon as I walked in that I shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And I knew, but I wanted to find out what all this, why are you following me? Why are you doing this? Yeah. And he offered me a glass of wine. And again, a choice I made is I drank it, which I should not have. Yeah. And from what happened after that, I don't remember, because I believe that the wine was drugged. And wow. There are moments that I have that I can remember what happened. There was a jacuzzi attached to his apartment. I remember being in that. I can remember certain things in the apartment, but I can't remember what his face looks like. And I think that's one of the things that I was afraid to go and talk to people about, because I couldn't identify him. And then he left me in a wooded area, and I woke up the next morning and I had to go to the emergency, and it all just started to bellow up. And I became a victim again within the medication, not the medication, I'm sorry, but the examination. It was my fault. Why did you go there? Why was that? And so when the police and all that got involved, I decided this is not what I want to do. I can't talk about this. And so it just led and kept me going deeper and deeper in silence and protecting myself, which I thought I was protecting. Yeah. And what really wasn't, I got very, very sick afterwards because of all the holding it in, that I could not finish my diving career. I went back home to get well. And it took me about a year to recover from all these emotional and physical ailments that I created, because I couldn't handle it, but I thought I could. Yeah. And so the years go on, and PTSD became a big deal, depression, anxiety, all these things. and even suicidal thoughts
Right.
became prevalent. And I finally did get myself back up and together and went back to Hollywood because I had started to work in Hollywood before I left. I started doing General Hospital, and I was brought back on. And so I put myself back into a situation where predators were all over the place.
Meaning in the world of television in Hollywood?
Yes, the entertainment business is completely filled. I cannot tell you how many times I would go into an audition and they would say, okay, we're going to put this on camera, but we need you in your underwear.
Okay.
Yeah. And so as eager actors, we were like, oh, sure, okay.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. They exploit your eagerness to break through and make it big and everything. And it's just that, up to hearing you say that, I'm a bit surprised being a man that you came across that.
it's
Because we hear about women like with Harvey Weinstein and everything like that's been going on for decades. And I mean, come on, did we not really suspect that?
exactly.
Yeah.
But with men, it's harder to prove.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a he says kind of thing. And unfortunately, when a rape situation does happen, men are very reluctant to go in to have that certain area examined.
Sure.
Because it meant that they gave up their masculinity or whatever it was. And so they don't say anything. Yeah. And and there's also, you get blacklisted in Hollywood. If you said anything, if you ever talked about it, or if you told anyone, you were no longer ever going to work again. So people just kept quiet about it. And it was rampant, I tell you. Well, they call it the casting couch, and it's real.
Right. So let's talk about this. Let's just shift gears to the world of athletics for a second. Yeah.
Okay.
Ooh, you okay?
Oh, I'm great.
Yeah. Well, it's just, what are the systemic issues you're seeing in the world of sports and athletics that facilitate, foster, or obscure the sexual abuse that's going on?
Well, I think things are beginning to change now. So this is coming from a past situation.
Sure.
I think our institutions, our sports institutions, are so interested and focused on their branding of what they look like and how much sponsorship that they can bring in. That if there's a scandal, they're going to try to cover it up as quickly and as able as they can. Right. And unfortunately, and I'm going to use the U.S. Gymnastics because that was the one that really exploded, because before that, we had the Sandusky situation. At the same time, we had the Dr. Anderson in Michigan. We also were having Dr. Strauss at Ohio State University, who were abusing males. But the gymnastics was females.
Right.
And if it wasn't for the Indiana Star reporters who got their first tip and they continued following it, they kept following the story and finding one girl, and they would find another athlete and another, and they were compiling this information up.
And they weren't going to let it go. When Simone Biles and Ali spoke up.
Exactly. Right? It wasn't until they actually stepped up, because if you talk to Simone Biles at this point, she was afraid to say anything because they had just saw Maggie Nichols, who was supposed to be on our Olympic team at the last Olympics, removed because she spoke up and she said something. Her parents reported it. There was supposed to be a whole investigation, but all of a sudden, Mr. Penny, Stephen Penny, who was the CEO of the U.S. Gymnastics, put a cover on top of it. Okay. Hired an investigator to say that they had gotten an investigation, but it was an inside situation to cover everything up. And the next thing we know, Maggie Nichols is no longer on the USA team.
Right.
So you got Ali and you got Simone, who are not going to say anything at this moment. It wasn't until after the Olympics that they came back that they started to step up and speak. And once they did, with all this press behind it, it started to explode. And there was no place to go. And I think the thing is that Nasser, who did it, deserves what he has gotten. I can't even talk now. It deserves what he's gotten, but he didn't do it alone. All these other people knew, Nasser started, and he started getting very confident, which is, I think, a lot of what happens with pedophiles and predators, is that they start feeling more confident. He was abusing young girls with the mother or the father in the room behind him. Wow. And he would use medical terms and say, I'm going to have to move your leg over here. I'm going to have to touch your thigh here, while he was doing what he was doing.
Yeah.
And Maggie Nichols walked up to Allie Raceman and said, is this normal? Does this, and she said, this happens to us all the time. So in the world of sports, we normalize so much. And diving, touching the diver, putting them in a certain position, holding them in a certain way, we all believe that it was part of the aesthetics of becoming a better alignment and stuff like that. So we went with it. And we were also told, and we were led to believe, that there are 5 other people that can come and take your place at any time.
You're expendable or replaceable.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So these institutions from top down were more interested about their money, their 6 figures that they were making, than about the athletes.
Yeah.
And and US gymnastics is so deep with the talent, any girl could walk in, which they showed, take place of Maggie Nichols, and the next thing you know, they're still Olympic champions.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that they use, and they build on that. And they don't want to lose their sponsors that are coming in. Millions and millions of dollars are coming into these sports events. Hockey is another one that is just about to explode. And there are lots that are now standing up and saying, this has happened to me. And they're men, and it's a big deal, but we don't hear about it as much as we heard about the girls, because, dad's going to protect the daughters. But then you've got this story where one of the girls told her father, and he was friends with Dr. Nasser, and said, you're lying to me. You can't tell that. Stop. And protected the doctor.
It's so tricky, because what if, okay, so if you don't believe them, obviously it's traumatic to the person who's being abused, and you're facilitating it, and in their eyes are almost a co-abuser.
Right.
And then there's the very rare time there's false accusations, and lives are ruined and careers are ruined because of that. So do you think, and I don't know what the best way is to navigate that, but do you ever think that comes into the mind of, say, a parent whose child says that to them, and they're thinking like, well, he didn't give you the starting position, so you're just mad at him, and then you're trying to get back at him by accusing him of this, and like, how do you think it plays out? Like, let's assume they're actually like a pretty decent parent that wants the best for their child, and they're trying to sort through that in your mind. How do you?
Well, I think first of all, I think the parent really needs to be able to step back for a moment and look at what's happening and assess the situation, and not say, I don't believe you right away. I think parents, if they're really attuned to what's happening, and if the abuse has been happening for a while, the child is trying to tell you. They may not use it verbally, but they'll do it physically in certain ways. I know that one.
How do they tell you physically?
I can only use my case, in my experience. Once my mother said that she didn't believe me, I then went on this campaign of trying to get them to notice things. I used to be very immaculate. I would like shower 2 to 3 times a day. I would always, if dirt got on my clothes, I would change. All of a sudden I stopped showering.
Oh.
I wouldn't shower for a week.
Okay.
Things like that. I never cussed. It just was never a part of my being. And every time I tried, everybody would laugh at it because it just didn't fit with me. But then I started dropping F-bombs.
Okay.
Out of nowhere for no reason.
So we therapists call that acting out.
Yes.
You're acting out in your behavior the pain and distress and discomfort that you're experiencing internally.
But I also had an agenda that I wanted them to ask me what was wrong.
Yeah, what's up with you?
Like
cry for help, sort of?
Yeah, exactly. If they could ask me, then I would be able to share it. I'm not allowed to come to them now because that door shut. That didn't work.
Yeah.
But if my mom or even if my dad would have said, okay, what's up with you?
Yeah.
And what was confusing about this, Paul, was that the coach was the one who did that.
Right.
Hey, what's wrong with you? What's going on? You're acting kind of weird. You can trust me, you can tell me and let me know what's happening.
But he was an abuser.
And he was an abuser at the same time, So the institutions are more worried about the money, medals, and how they look. And I think also parents, I'm going to flip back, I'm all over the place again.
Okay.
When parents are worried about how their reputation is going to be. If I go forward and say something about this and it's a lie, that's going to make me look bad. And especially if I'm friends with the predator. which a lot of times the predators always befriends the parents. And
Okay.
we've seen it over and over many times where the predator is actually a family friend who they invite in, who they have dinner with. This couldn't happen to our house, and that whole idea. I do believe, what is it, less than 4% of children that say something like this are lying,
Right.
according to,
Very low, very low.
yes.
I don't know the exact statistic, but
Unfortunately, there are those few that have lied about it
yeah.
and have ruined people's lives. And that's what we all look at. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
We
I
think,
do.
oh
Well,
my
that's
God.
what I was talking about earlier, that the
Exactly.
costs are so high for if someone misspeaks. I think it scares everybody.
But I do want,
I think we need to be ready. I think we need to be more ready to clean up that mess than we are to ignore it and clean up a bigger mess.
you're absolutely right.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I do want to say that parents can report it anonymously, and there could be an investigation done without it being an explosion at the very beginning. Do you know what I mean? They can call child services, and they can send somebody out and start watching practices or start moving around and be a third party. So it's not this, you're not confronting the coach, you're not saying this, and you're not accusing anybody. It can be done as an anonymous bystander who can come in and assess. I think parents should also take the time to watch practices with coaches and how they interact with the child, or how are they touching the child, how are they looking at the child. And I think that might be something we can talk about later. But
Well,
it's just,
yeah. Let's talk about the grooming trifecta.
Okay.
I was reading your bio, and I was like, that's an interesting. I got to ask him about that. Okay, because that's an interesting phrase. And you said that you kind of coined this. You kind of coined this phrase, right?
correct.
So
Correct.
trifecta, 3, try. What are we talking about here?
Okay, in this sense of sports, because we could use this diagram in sports and outside of sports, but sports, the triangle at the top would be your predator.
Okay.
At one corner would be a parent, and on the other corner would be the institution or the organization. And in the middle is the child.
Okay.
And so they are all connected.
Okay.
So the predator is able to groom the organization, to be able to be hired, to get what he needs, the protection that he needs. No one's going to believe this. He's doing such a great job. We're not going to get rid of him. This is just rumors. This is hearsay. We don't know that. We're not going to look at it. Then he can groom the parents, and to get them to be friends with them, to win their trust, to get them to understand that they're the best person for their child. All this happens before they even go into the child.
Interesting, right?
And then the parents of the organization have a relationship going at the bottom, so that they can trust. Well, I trust the organization. They would tell me if something was going on.
Yeah.
And if they haven't said anything, then why should I believe this?
Yeah, and it gives the impression of abuse probably not being a random impulsive act, but what you're talking about is the kind of predator that is deliberate and intentional and patient and
Professional.
very, yeah.
They know what they're doing. They've been doing it for a long time. And I mean, there are studies that say that predators are usually survivors of abuse themselves at a certain time, and they may not have gotten the help that they needed. But that, I think, is really a generalized statement, because I know many abused children who end up being great citizens and give back to the community and are not, repeating their situation.
Yeah.
But I think this becomes very narcissistic in a way as a predator looks at this, because they know what they want and they go through all of this orchestration to get what they want.
Right.
Their end goal is more important than all the elements ahead of it. And I think sometimes they have issues with empathy. And I don't think they realize that by taking advantage of a young child, how many other lives are you messing up? Because it just doesn't mess up that child. It's going to mess up the parents when the parents learn about it. It can mess up the other teammates or the other children around them.
Yeah.
and also is going to span out to the future. It's going to affect the partners of this person that's been abused. It's going to affect the trust with work. It's all this stuff. And I think that's one of the things that I think we get confused about. I know here in the States we do. I know as soon as Nassar was put away, everyone thought it was over with. It's done.
It's so not though, is it?
All 100 and so young women and
Is that how many? How many were there?
There was over 100, yes. Like
Just from the one
165, yes. Now we're not talking about Anderson and Strauss had like over 300, because they were getting away with it a lot more because they were abusing boys.
So do we call, at what point do we call this an epidemic of sexual abuse among organized sports?
Right now.
Like
I think we call it
right?
now. Exactly.
Yeah, like it's not 10.
It's hundreds. Yes.
Hundreds. Yeah.
That we know of. We got to remember that's
that we know of. Yeah.
These are the women that have come forward, and I mean they actually had their and they actually had the opportunity to say what they wanted to say to Nassar in court. All 100 of them that came together.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
Pretty impressive. So it's just crazy how this all works out, and I think that they know what they're doing, and they will change their mode of operandi. You know, they could be on, let's use a diving team. Let's say there's 15 members on the team, and there are 5 that this coach is interested in. He will use 5 different methods to get closer to each one of those kids.
Okay.
Because one may not work out. And they're not always, and here's the thing I really want to stress, it's not always the child that has the broken home or is poor.
Okay.
They will, I know some that will go for the most popular kid because that's what they're attracted to. It's what they're attracted to. It's not, it doesn't, I don't think they really think about the economic issues. You know, there are certain things that I think people want, and I know in the States, they want a list of A, B, C, and D of how a predator works. And it doesn't work that way because they all do different things. You know, one may do A, the next one may start with C. And so it's completely individualized based on that person. And what has worked for him in the past or her in the past. Do you know what I mean? And they will change it, and they will capitalize on what worked and what didn't. I mean, some of the things that are red flags is, you know, isolating the child is one of the things that are definitely a clue.
Yeah, let's go into that, because I wanted to ask you, like, what do parents, let's say, let's just talk to parents for a minute, or maybe an older sibling or relative. What are you looking for? Like, yeah, you were just starting to talk about that, but go ahead. Like, what can we do, and what are we looking for?
So if I'm a parent and I have a child, and I hope that I can share this with you all as clearly as I think it. First of all, get to know your child. There's going to be that difficult time in the teenage years where they pull away, and that's part of growing up, and we all know that. But if you know your child and you've created that conversation from a very young age and cultivate that, the separation will be natural and and you'll understand it, but you'll still be able to watch their body language, listen to how they speak. Things change. When a traumatic experience like sexual abuse happens, it changes their brains, the way they think, the way they see, they're acting out. There's all these other little elements can happen. And if you miss that, start noticing that, okay, you're spending more time with the coach alone. What's that about? Ask these questions.
Okay, so you just mentioned sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned two things: a sudden noticeable change of behavior and mannerism, and time alone with a coach that seems, would you say, unnecessary, maybe?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
What do you need one-on-one with a coach for, unless it's like a 5-minute chat or something? Beyond that doesn't seem to make sense, right?
Yeah,
especially
overnight trips.
Sport, right?
Right, overnight trips with a coach, and it's just the two of you, red flag people.
Oh, okay.
That's something to look at. Driving the child to and from practices, which you will tell the parent you're helping them out because they can't get home from work or whatever. I'll drive them home for it. Anytime the child is alone, it's it's one says this, the other one says that. There's no real concrete evidence about that. And I know safe sports.
No witness.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And who's going to believe the child? And that's the way our society has been brought up. We believe the adults.
Sure.
We trust them. Why would they do something like this?
Okay.
And that's one of the things they get away with. Other things is if there's gifts involved. Anytime there's some type of monetary thing being passed around, I'm going to give you a scholarship, so you don't have to pay for anything.
Okay.
And that would be on the surface, but there'll be other little things that will be given, you know.
Right. And I guess we should say none of these things on their own is necessarily 100% sign of sexual abuse. Because like you said, teenagers can be moody. They can change their hairstyle overnight for no other reason than they're trying to be cool and fit in. Maybe a gift is just simply a gift, or a scholarship is just a scholarship, right?
Right.
Okay.
But usually the parents are in on the gifts and the scholarship ahead of time.
I see.
If the predator is doing his, I shouldn't say his or her job correctly, I don't think there's a correct way to do it. In my case,
it's not really a job, I guess, but maybe from their point of view, right? Yeah.
And in my case, my mom knew the scholarship was going to happen.
Yeah.
She knew that there was going to be this was going to happen. The eye doctors are going to give free examinations. Right. Medicines were going to come in. She knew that up front. And it's really interesting. That's another talk we can have later, when my mother and I finally sat down one day and talked about what happened.
I want to
hear her story. Yeah. Her side is really interesting.
Okay.
But there are all these things. And you remember, mothers, and I really believe this, have a sixth sense. They know in their gut, you know, that there's something going on. They just know. I mean,
trust your gut.
Exactly. And if you're wrong, you just ask the question. And if you're wrong, be willing to say you're wrong. I'm sorry. I just had this feeling. I guarantee you, if my mother would have asked me and none of the abuse was happening, I think I would have respected her, because I knew she cared.
Mm.
You know, I might have been embarrassed that you're asking me this. Why are you thinking that? What does that mean? Da, 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 da. But then deep down underneath, I would think, oh my God, she cared. She cared enough to find out what was going on. And I think that's something that I think we're missing. And I think we're starting to get back to that with therapists and therapy and talking to your children. I think unfortunately, we're going through this whole thing. And I think COVID brought up a lot of that too, is that we were stuck back together. And just imagine if your abuser was within the house. What did that child do? Where did that child go? You know? And if the parent was being really aware of what was happening, the child had isolated himself. Is that normal? Why are they by themselves constantly?
Right. Yeah. Or how about this? Ask your child. Yeah.
Ask.
Hey, Johnny, Jimmy, you know, you ever see the coach kind of do something that makes you feel a little off?
Right.
I bet
you feel uncomfortable.
You knew, you had a feeling. Something's not, like before anything even happened, something's not right here. So imagine how relieved the kid would be that's in this situation if their mom or dad comes to them and says, you know, hey, this might sound like a funny question, but does Coach Jones ever like do anything that makes you feel off or touch anyone in a kind of a funny way? Oh, thank God you asked me.
You're absolutely right. And you can also ask it, like you just said, ask it, has he touched another athlete some way that you weren't, that you saw, and remove it out to a third person situation and allow the child to tell you, but you've got to listen to their responses.
Right.
Because they will share what they can at the moment. You got to remember that the predators already probably told them that they can't tell anyone. If they tell anyone, this will happen, this will happen, and this will happen. There's threats everywhere. You're never going to make it to the Olympics if anyone finds out. There's even been stories where kids were threatened by their life if they've ever said anything, or one of their family members would be, you know, I'll kill your brother if you tell anybody.
Oh, yeah.
You know, things like that. But that's like the real extreme situation. I think the most successful predators, the Nassers, the Andersons, the Strausses, were so good at making you feel comfortable and acknowledged and heard.
Yeah.
Because in that whole realm with the gymnastics, the women will tell you that during practices and at the camp that they would go to, it was abusive. the verbal abuse, of the hitting that was happening during practices, that they would go see Strauss and he would be, oh my God, tell me all about it. And would listen to them vent. And that's how he groomed them and brought them in.
Grooming.
And they would give him candy because they weren't allowed to have candy. He was the one, if you wanted a candy bar, go see Nasser. He'll give it to you.
Sounds like a cliche almost. Here's some
Totally.
candy, you know, like the guy with the van and the kid that come on in, kid with the candy, you know, it's like a cliche, but yeah, so I want to ask you kind of a specific question here. So from time to time, you know, I talk to people, clients, who tell me, you know, as a boy, I was, you know, sexually abused by a man, and yet it wasn't the way they remember it or describe it. It wasn't abusive, painful, mean, and I'm talking like one-on-one, not necessarily in the world of sports or coach,
Right.
but it was an older person that they respected, and so they didn't actually feel traumatized by it. They didn't actually think anything was wrong. And it wasn't until years later that they started to realize they were actually a victim of sexual abuse. So does that surprise you to hear me say that? And what would your, it doesn't, okay, what would your response be to someone that went through that?
Well, I just want to share with you that you need to see the movie, The Tale, T-A-L-E, The Tale.
Okay.
The Tale and then they're directed by Jennifer Fox.
Okay.
And it starred Laura Dern. And this is exactly what you're talking about. There are many times, even in my situation, I was confused by my coach because I thought he understood me and was and he wasn't violent. The abuse wasn't like what was happening with the professionals.
Okay.
And so it was different. And what I would say to this child is here's the first thing I need you to understand. You're not alone. And I believe you. I understand what you're going through. And I understand that there are moments that it felt good. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
This is the problem is whenever there is a person who is an adult and you were a child, that is considered abuse.
Yes.
And the biggest point of that is because the brains have not been developed fully in the child to be able to give consent. Right. And what consent really means, although the child may think they are giving consent. You know, and there are many times, and even in the movie, you will see that she thought it was a relationship with these two people who were her coaches. They gave her things. They everything was beautiful. It took her until later in life to realize it was abuse. And it was, and the thing that happened that triggered it all is that she kept a diary. And her mother was cleaning out her room one day and found it. And her mother was the one that started to push the buttons. What do you mean this happened to you? What do you mean? And why didn't I see it? Why didn't I know? So she confronted the daughter, and the daughter says, oh, it was nothing. It was nothing. It really wasn't. It wasn't until she realized that the power situation was involved. They were manipulating her. Yeah. And children are manipulated. Yeah. You know, and if you're going to help you, if your child is if your family is in an economical situation, and this person says, I'm going to give you this amount of money that you could take back to your family. Oh my God, okay, what do I have to do? Yeah. You know, and it takes different personalities. I do know a hockey player who was groomed by the coach. And at the final end, he said no and got up and walked out. But the coach came back and groomed him again and kept grooming him. And he kept saying, no, no, no. And the coach was telling him that he wanted to have this woman come in and give him oral sex, but he had to be blindfolded and have his hands tied behind his back. And this hockey player just said, I don't want to be tied up. And I want my first experience with a woman to mean something to me. This is not, no. Later on, it came out that this was his way to abuse the boys. Right. Get them blindfolded and tied. Yes. Right. Yeah. 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 And you touched on something earlier that I think it's good mentioning again is there's, and I've explained this to clients, you know,
your body has millions of nerve endings,
Mm.
and they're wired to respond to touch at certain, if you touch a body in a certain part, there's going to be a reaction. And this isn't voluntary necessarily, right?
Correct.
And did you, and maybe you can share from your own experience, did you find like unwanted arousal did that create confusion about whether you really liked it or wanted it, or your sexual orientation or anything like that?
All of the above.
Right.
It created the confusion about all of the above, because that was my first introduction to sex.
Oh, was I? Yeah.
Yeah, that was my first, until then, I had the whole idea that I was going to save myself for the wedding night with my wife, and it would be our first time together and we'd explore it to be beautiful. But that was taken from me. And I think the other thing that was really anger that I felt was that I never got the chance to explore with kids my age at the time. It was taken from me. So I didn't get to find out if I wanted to be with a girl or with a guy. It was chosen for me by a man. A man decided that this is what you're going to, and then they kept passing me on. So that made me think that this must be what it is. And then I had a father at home who was very religious, and I swear he had to have known this was happening, but he would start citing verses from the Bible. You're an abomination. If a man lies with another man, they are going to hell. And so he would constantly just say these things to me under his breath. And so I remember at one point, I said, I'm never going to take a woman to hell with me. So I guess this is my life.
Wow.
And so I'm still to this day angry about not being able to experience that nervousness with the first kiss. Being attracted to someone, I still was attracted to people at school and wanted to be near them, and I'd get that nervousness, but also behind all that was this whole line of professionals who had already taken that from me. And so I felt like an empty shell. I felt an abomination. I felt that I was dirty. I was not clean, and all these thoughts. So I started this whole self-negative talk about myself, that I wasn't good enough, I wasn't worthy enough. So I would just decided that I was going to run away. Everything became about running with me, and I wouldn't stay in one place too long. And when I went to LA to be an actor, that it was perfect, because I'd do a role for a while, that role would be in, and then I run to another role.
Sure.
And that's what sustained me for such a long time. And I find myself, if things got too close, if people started to know me too much, I would never talk to them again.
Right. And how much, let's imagine your father, rather than muttering Bible verses under his breath to you, what if he had taken an open and honest approach of, having a conversation with you that was empathetic and supportive? Would you have, I know it's impossible to say, but would that have, let's say, mitigated the trauma by like 90% maybe, or something, at least 50%?
I definitely think so. And I think that if it would have happened earlier, before the abuse would have happened, I think it might have even prevented the abuse from happening.
Right.
Because I would have known that my father was in my corner, if that makes sense. And I don't need this over here.
Yeah.
Well,
I can see him sort of taking you aside, and you telling him, and him believing you and saying, you know what, son, like you don't need to be doing this, and you don't need these people, and I'm really sorry this happened to you, and I'm going to go take care of it. All right. And this was wrong, and here we go.
Exactly.
Anything but what you got, right? So yeah, it kind of makes me sad to think of your dad being so emotionally disengaged that he was completely non-supportive of you. But yeah, I want to hear how it ended up with mom too, because boy, did she drop the ball. And I'm curious if you ever reconciled that.
I believe we have.
Yeah. Did you have to like call a sit down and be like, okay, mom, I got to talk to you about this, or how did that happen?
I will let you know that she did the call sit down. She initiated it.
Okay.
And it happened after I had broken my silence on the TED Talk that I did. And my first book came out. She got a copy. And then she finally sat down and said, I've been listening to certain things, and I need you to hear my side of the story. I don't need you to accept it, and I don't need you to, forgive me or anything, but I need you to know that I was groomed before anyone ever got to you.
She was groomed.
Yes, she was groomed by the lawyer. She was groomed by the coach, and she believed them because they were telling her what she needed to hear at that time, and she trusted them. And that was the biggest thing that she hated about it. And she literally said, I feel like a failure to you as a mother. I should have been there for you. I should have stood up for you. And I should have believed you when you told me.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I didn't, because I was more worried about what people were going to think about me.
Wow.
And how everyone would look at us,
Mm-hmm.
opposed to helping you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a big deal for me, and it really helped a lot. And our relationship has come back together. And I remember saying to her, it wasn't your fault, Mom.
Yeah.
I never really held her responsible, or my dad. I think that I just figured that this was what was going to have to happen, or this is what happened, and how do I deal with it? The only thing I think I regret is not being able to share more earlier. It had to take me until I was much older, and I never got to share it with my dad.
Is he passed?
Yes.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the reasons my mom did share, because she also, she let me know that my dad went through his experience and how that was very hard for him. And she said that he would tell her that I was going through the same thing, that he could see himself in me, and he didn't know how to do it. He told her one time he wanted to beat it out of me. If he could beat me hard enough, that would get it out of me, but he never did.
Wow.
But he had told her that he thought that would be a way to save me,
Right.
because he never had it taken care of. And so I think that's sad. And when I look back, I feel sorry for them, but I also realize and recognize that they didn't play their part. They allowed it to slip through their hands.
Mm-hmm.
And literally my mother handed me over, and she has to be responsible for that. And when she did stand up and say, I did that, it was healing.
I was going to say,
it was a healing.
Wonderfully healing to hear that from her. After many years, I guess,
Yes.
decades. You waited a long time to hear those words, didn't you?
I did, and it came out of nowhere. That's the thing that was surprising. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't instigated by myself, or it came out of her timing. And one of the things she said during that whole conversation is, she says, I'm sorry it's taken me so long, but I had to weigh everything out because I wasn't sure what was real and what was lies.
Right. Do you appreciate her perspective? Like, I'm not saying you condone it, or
Right.
give her, she doesn't get a free pass for that, but as you know, now that as you're mature and a few decades down the road from that, do you understand her perspective? Or
I think I do understand it better than I did before.
Yeah.
I don't know if I completely understand it fully, but I do understand the fact that if I hang on to this victimism that I've created, I am reliving those events every day. And I hate the word victim, and I also hate the word survivor in a way, because that takes me right back to that same thing again. Oh, I'm a survivor of that.
Yeah.
I wish
a term that you prefer?
I haven't figured one out yet.
Oh, okay.
But I respect everybody using the word survivor. I do.
Yeah.
But I think the fact is that they're both still tied back to that incident. And when I hear myself introduced, or someone says, oh, we have a survivor with us tonight, I'm like, oh God, wait, they're talking about me. That means, oh yeah, that did happen. And I think the more that we can get away from the event, then we could start looking at the feelings and the emotions and the self-talk that we apply to what happened. Not necessarily the event, it's the words that we said to ourselves and the beliefs that we attach to it, to the emotions, that has caused me, I can say for myself, to start re-victimizing myself constantly.
Right.
I didn't need anybody outside to do it for me. I was doing a good job on my own every day.
especially after you went away to university, I think, right?
Yes.
That
And
was
that's the other thing
Yeah.
that might be interesting for you, Paul, to hear is that I handled, I thought, pretty well the professionals and being passed around all the way through high school. But when I got to college and that incident happened, that was what broke me.
Yeah.
That's what I felt. Besides, I felt like my childhood was stolen. I was able to go, okay, that's what happened, leave it in the past. But that event, I don't know why.
Mhm.
I refused to ever think about it for the longest time. And I was writing the second book, and it was supposed to be about my Hollywood years and all the experiences that were happening. But the book wasn't coming because I had totally removed that whole incident at the university. So the second book is about that, about talking about it. And I'm so glad I did, because it's allowed me to open up and understand more. But I'm still curious about why that one event that happened one time is what broke me, and all these other things that happened over a period of 4 years, maybe that all led up to that one thing. I don't know, but that's something interesting to talk about with somebody, is how we will allow that one incident that can create us to fall apart.
Yeah, that's not unusual. Like, I know this is a little different, but I work with a lot of first responders, and they'll go to horror after horror after horror, and 90% of those things don't affect them. But it's that one call, the 15-year-old they found hanging in the garage just as the mom runs in and finds them there. That's what haunts them. That's what haunts them and keeps them up at night, right? And it just seems to be an accumulation of factors that all come together, and maybe they were really tired that day, or stressed, or depleted, or other things going on in their life. And you know, a lot of it is, I mean, it's good to talk about or work it out in therapy or whatever, but don't drive yourself, I tell them, don't drive yourself too nuts about this, because this is an automatic, we're talking about a part of your brain that's very primitive, fight, flight, or freeze.
Exactly.
And who knows why that got to you, but it did somehow. And but it's interesting how it's the one, or you know, I have a buddy, he's a firefighter for like 30 years, and he doesn't have PTSD, he doesn't have flashbacks, but he goes, yeah, Paul, there's that one or two I try not to think about it.
Right.
You know, the one or two calls. So it's, I don't know, I'm just kind of got off track there, but you got me thinking. I warned you, I might get off track.
Got me thinking there too.
So,
I think there's definitely something there.
yeah, it's interesting. So I guess let's wrap up here in a few minutes, John-Michael, but what would you say to someone, male, female, boy, girl, watching this, that's maybe they're in the middle of this, you know, I hope some people get a hold of this video that are going through this or have gone through it. Talk to them right now, just take a couple minutes. Imagine they're sitting there, they're going through this now. What could you say to them?
First of all, I would say thank you so much for sharing with me. That you trusted me enough to tell me this. Then I would say, you're not alone. You've never been alone. There are people that are willing to hear and listen and believe what you have to say. I also say to you, what happened to you was horrible. And although you may think it isn't as bad as it is, you need to take the moment and recognize it for what it is. And once you start to recognize what it is, you can start your healing process, and you can start to find ways to take care of yourself and to understand what's going on inside of you, because it's going to be different. And once the abuse has happened with you, you're going to have to understand that you're not like everyone else, because your wiring is going to be a little bit different now. And you got to realize that what gets you angry may not get somebody else angry, and that doesn't mean that you're bad. That is just part of what is happening with you. Second of all, it's not your fault. Make sure you understand it's not your fault. It hasn't been your fault. And you got to also understand, if you still have feelings for this person, that's normal. You are dealing with feelings and emotions And as a young person, they seem to be real at this moment, and they are for you.
Yeah.
So just be kind to yourself, listen to yourself, and make sure you step back a moment from this relationship and see, is that person an adult? Is that person doing something that you don't want? Are you giving more of yourself than they are giving back to you? Things like that. Just look at that and let yourself know and be honest with yourself. Because once you start to be honest, then you're able to help yourself, and then you can start healing yourself, and then you can help others to see what's going on as well.
Beautiful, wonderful. Yeah, thank you. And I'll just add to that. If you're watching this and you're going through it, there is professional help out there for you. The first thing is you talk to your parents or a trusted family member. But if that does, as we heard from John-Michael, sometimes that's going to not land anywhere. That's going to miss. But there's counselors at your school. There's counselors in your community. There's community agencies that have free counseling, or professionals like myself that you can reach out to, and they will listen to you, and they're trained to help you get through this. So I really encourage you to reach out.
Exactly.
John-Michael, you mentioned a TED Talk. How can viewers find that? Can they just type your name in on YouTube, or?
You could say John-Michael Lander TED Talk, and it'll pop right up.
Okay, and is it about your experiences, the TED Talk?
Yes, it is.
Wonderful.
It's about when I was diving for the U.S. diving team. Yeah.
Okay, and any other websites with more information that you want me to put up in the description?
Oh, definitely. It would be great if you put up my website, which is anathletesilence.com.
Athlete Silence?
Yes, the two S's are there, so it's Athletes Silence. And there's all my speaking engagements. Anytime there's a recording, you can find it there. And there's a lot of resources there that you can find. And I have a series called the Spotlight Series, which interviews different people, and it's very helpful. It helps a lot of people.
Okay, I really appreciate that. I'll put that up in the description so people can access those resources. John-Michael, I want to thank you so much again for coming. I really appreciated this conversation, and I think it's so important. I say the number one rule of a dysfunctional family is don't talk. The number one rule of a dysfunctional society is don't talk. So let's talk about it. And I really appreciate what you've done, taking your pain really and your experiences and turn them around to shine light actually on this, and to speak up and to help others. So thanks so much for what you do, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.